Beneath the moon's unyielding gaze, ancient syllables stirred the embers of forgotten oaths, weaving fire into a shroud that whispered rather than consumed. The wind howled through the jagged spires of Eldfrost Keep, carrying the bite of eternal winter across the snow-swept courtyard. Flakes swirled like restless spirits, settling on the frost-kissed stones where the Council of Elders stood in a semicircle, their fur-lined cloaks heavy with the weight of judgment. Torches sputtered in iron brackets, casting erratic shadows that clawed at the night. But it was the central pyre that commanded the silence, a stake of blackened oak, bound with ropes coarse as betrayal, where Ylvara Runavale knelt. Her wrists chafed raw against the unyielding bonds. At 33 winters, Ylvara had long since learned the shape of solitude, but this was no quiet exile into the wilds. This was spectacle, a ritual to purge what the pack deemed heresy. Her dark hair, matted with snow, framed a face etched by quiet defiance. High cheekbones sharp as the mountain peaks, eyes the color of storm-tossed seas. She was Omega by birth, marked by the subtle grace that bent rather than broke under the Alpha's will. Yet her voice had always carried an undercurrent of something wilder, something the elders whispered was touched by the old gods. Now, that voice had sealed her fate. The High Elder, a grizzled wolf named Thorn, stepped forward, his breath fogging the air like a curse. Ylvara Runavale, you have uttered the forbidden tongue, words meant to slumber with the ancients. They bind what should not be bound, unravel what the Dusa wove whole. For this blasphemy, the pack condemns you to the flames. May the moon witness your purification. Murmurs rippled through the gathered shifters, alphas with armored shoulders, betas clutching spears, omegas averted their eyes in shared dread. The air smelled of pine resin and fear sweat, undercut by the metallic tang of impending blood. Ylvara's heart pounded, not with terror, but with the steady rhythm of inevitability. She had spoken the words in the temple's shadowed alcove, not in rebellion, but in grief, after her mate's death in the border skirmishes, when the pain clawed too deep for howls alone. The ancient tongue had risen unbidden, a lullaby from her grandmother's faded tales, promising solace in syllables that hummed like distant thunder. They had dragged her here at dusk, stripping her of her woolen shawl, leaving her in a thin shift that did little against the cold seeping into her bones. The stake loomed behind her, its wood scarred from past condemnations, a silent testament to the pack's fragile order. As Thorn raised his hand, the torchbearers advanced, their flames leaping hungrily, illuminating the intricate runes carved into the courtyard's flagstones, symbols of the Dusa's pact, now twisted into tools of execution. Ylvara lifted her chin, the wind tugging at her lips. She would not beg. Instead, as the first torch touched the pyre's kindling, she spoke again. Ilindra Vethar, Solkari Nun. The words flowed soft yet unyielding, ancient as the glaciers that birthed these mountains, carrying the cadence of wind through hollow bones. They were not a plea, but a recognition, a bridge to powers long buried under layers of fear and forgotten lore. The flames caught, roaring to life with unnatural vigor. Heat bloomed, fierce and immediate, licking at the air around her. Gasps echoed from the crowd as the fire surged upward, not in chaotic fury, but in deliberate coils, wrapping around Ylvara's form like serpents of living light. They danced along her arms, traced the curve of her shoulders, flickered across her unbound hair without singeing a thread. The scent of burning pine filled the night, but beneath it lingered something sweeter, ozone and wild herbs, the breath of awakening earth. Ylvara's skin prickled, not with pain, but with a profound warmth that seeped into her core, chasing away the winter's chill. The fire did not consume. It caressed, as if greeting a long-lost kin. Her breath steadied, eyes closing briefly to feel the pulse of it, the way the flames hummed in harmony with her words, responding not to dominion, but to an innate kinship. In that moment, doubt flickered in her mind. Was this the Deusa's mercy, or a deeper curse revealing a gift she had never sought? From the shadowed balcony above, Alpha King Halvik Stoneborn watched, his broad frame rigid beneath a cloak of silver fox fur. At 50, he bore the weight of his crown like a scar, deep lines etched across his brow, silver threading his dark beard, eyes the stormy gray of mountain slate. He had ordered this trial, swayed by Thorn's warnings of unrest, of a tongue that could shatter the fragile peace his pack clung to after years of war. The borders bled with rival incursions, traitors whispering in the halls, and Halvik's own guilt gnawed at him, the lives lost under his command, the mate he could not save from fever's grasp a decade past. He ruled with an ethical iron fist, melancholic in his solitude, haunted by the Deusa's silence. But now, as the fire wove its impossible ballet around the condemned Omega, a chill unrelated to the snow gripped him. Her voice pierced the night, stirring echoes in his blood, memories of boyhood scrolls, of prophecies half-remembered, speaking of a key forged in flame and forgotten words. The throne he sat upon was built on such bindings, powers his lineage had sworn to seal away. If she was no heretic, but the living vessel of that ancient force, the horror settled like frost in his veins. He had sought to silence a threat. Instead, he had unveiled the one soul who might unmake his world, or redeem it. The crowd fell utterly still, the only sound the crackle of flames and the distant uivo of wolves on the ridge. Ilvara's eyes opened, meeting the fire's glow, and in their depths, Halvik glimpsed not defiance, but a quiet unraveling. The first thread of a destiny neither could escape. The pyre burned brighter, illuminating the snow in crimson hues as the night held its breath for what came next. The flames lingered like faithful specters, their warmth a deceptive embrace against the encroaching frost, as Ilvara's words faded into the night's vast hush. She felt the fire's pulse sync with her own, a living rhythm that both anchored and unsettled her, as if the elements themselves had chosen her for a purpose she could neither grasp nor refuse. The crowd's silence thickened, broken only by the crackle of embers and the wind's low moan through the keep's battlements. Eyes wide with awe and accusation bore into her, but Ilvara met none of them. Her gaze drifted upward, drawn by an invisible thread to the shadowed balcony where the Alpha King stood motionless, his silhouette etched against the moon's pale sickle. Halvik's command shattered the stasis like a blade through ice. Enough! His voice rolled down from the heights, deep and resonant, carrying the authority of storms long weathered. Torchbearers recoiled, the pyre's blaze dimming as if in deference, leaving tendrils of smoke curling toward the stars. Thorn whirled, his grizzled face twisting in protest, but Halvik descended the stone steps with deliberate strides, his boots crunching snow into submission. The silver fox cloak billowed behind him, revealing armor scarred by old wars, dents from rival claws. Engravings of the Deusa's crescent moon faded to ghosts. At 50, he moved not with the reckless vigor of youth, but with the measured gravity of one who had buried too many beneath the white shroud of these mountains. Ilvara remained kneeling, the ropes biting into her wrists, her shift damp with melted snow and the faint char of unbound fire. Fear coiled in her chest, not of the king, for what more could he take, but of the curiosity blooming unbidden within her. His scent reached her first, carried on the wind, pine and iron, laced with the subtle musk of restrained power, an alpha's aura that stirred her omega instincts like a half-remembered dream. She should have averted her eyes, submitted to the hierarchy etched into her blood, but the fire's residue hummed in her veins, lending her a defiance she had never claimed. He halted before her, close enough that she could see the storm-gray depths of his eyes, shadowed by brows furrowed in conflict. Up close, the weight of his guilt was palpable, a melancholy etched into the lines around his mouth, the subtle tremor in his clenched jaw. Halvik had ruled Eldfrost for 2 decades, forging peace from the ashes of endless border wars, yet each victory tasted of loss. The mate fever had claimed years ago had left him hollow, a king who enforced ethics with unyielding duty, even as doubt whispered of his throne's fragile foundations. And now this Omega, with her forbidden tongue, unraveled the bindings he had sworn to uphold. "You speak words that should have died with the old world," he said, his tone low, threaded with a curiosity he masked as accusation. He knelt to her level, a gesture that silenced the murmurs anew, his gloved hand hovering near the ropes without touching. The air between them crackled, not with flame, but with an instinctive pull, an ancient recognition that made her breath hitch. Her pulse quickened, drawn to the quiet storm in him, the way his presence wrapped around her like the fire had, protective yet perilous. Yet she denied it, rationalizing the warmth as lingering heat, the curiosity as survival's ploy. Fear lingered too. What if this connection was the true heresy, a bridge to powers that could doom them both? Ilvara met his gaze, her storm-sea eyes steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "They are not mine to bury, my king. They rose from grief, from the Deusa's own silence. If they burn without consuming, perhaps it is not blasphemy, but truth." Her voice, soft as falling snow, carried the echo of those ancient syllables, stirring something in him, a flicker of memory from dusty tomes, prophecies of a voice that could unbind the gods' chains or forge new ones. He felt it in his blood, a cursed kinship, as if her words had awakened a wound he had long cauterized with duty. With a swift motion, Halvik drew a dagger from his belt, its blade catching the moonlight in a silver arc. He severed the ropes, the fibers parting with a whisper, and helped her to her feet. Her skin brushed his gauntlet, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt through them both, instinctive, electric, born of the wild bond that linked Alpha and Omega in the Deusa's weave. She pulled back, curiosity warring with denial, her mind reeling from the intimacy of it. He was the architect of her condemnation, yet in his eyes she saw not hatred, but a haunted recognition, as if she were the mirror to his unspoken curses. The crowd stirred uneasily, Thorn's growl rising like distant thunder. "Sire, she is the threat we feared, a vessel for chaos. The rivals at the borders grow bold. Her tongue could summon worse than fire." Halvik's jaw tightened, the guilt flaring anew. He had ordered her trial to quell unrest, to protect the pack from whispers of ancient powers that might invite war anew. But now, standing before her, he glimpsed the horror of his error. She was no mere heretic, but the key to a destiny his throne could neither control nor ignore. "She will be exiled," he declared, his voice brooking no argument, "to the whispering peaks, beyond our lands. Let the wilds judge what the pack cannot." It was mercy cloaked as banishment, a choice born of his ethical core, yet laced with the fear that proximity to her might unravel him further. As guards escorted her toward the keep's outer gates, Ilvara glanced back, the wind whipping snow across her path. Halvik remained, watching her silhouette fade into the moonlit drifts, the fire's embers dying behind them. The connection lingered, denied but undeniable, a spark in the cold, curiosity edging towards something deeper, more perilous. In the distance, a lone wolf howled, its cry echoing the turmoil in her heart. What strength was there in mercy if it led only to greater isolation? The night deepened, the peaks looming like silent judges, as fate's threads tightened around them both. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The snow-laden path to the whispering peaks wound like a scar through the mountain's flank. Each step, a reluctant surrender to the wilds that had always called to Ilvara in whispers she dared not heed. Exile was no gentle banishment. It was the pack's final severance, a casting into the void where only the Deuce's indifferent gaze watched over the Forsaken. Her thin shift, now torn at the hem from the guard's rough handling, clung to her skin like a second chill, the fire's lingering warmth a fading memory against the wind's relentless bite. Barefoot, she trudged onward, the frost numbing her soles until they bled faint crimson trails into the white, each drop swallowed by the drifts without mercy or witness. The peaks loomed ahead, their jagged silhouettes clawing at the moon's underbelly, where clouds gathered like unspoken accusations. Ilvara had known isolation before, nights spent tending the temple's hearths alone after her mate's pyre had cooled to ash. But this was different. The ancient words still echoed in her throat, a vibration that hummed beneath her ribs, as if the tongue itself refused to be silenced. Fear gnawed at her edges, not of the cold or the beasts that prowled these borders, but of the curiosity that had sparked in the king's storm-gray eyes. Why had he spared her, only to hurl her into this abyss? The instinctive pull she had felt, raw, unbidden, lingered like a bruise, rationalized as Omega deference, yet it stirred a deeper unrest, a curiosity laced with dread. Hours blurred into a numb march as the keep's lights faded to pinpricks behind her. The wind carried distant weavos, not the pack's harmonious chorus, but solitary cries from the fringe dwellers, rogue shifters, or worse, the rival clans that tested Eldfrost's borders with increasing audacity. Ilvara's breath came in shallow clouds, her body aching from the pyre's ordeal, but the true weight was the isolation's quiet philosophy. What was freedom, if it echoed only with the ghosts of what was lost? She paused at a narrow ravine, its walls glistening with ice-veined rock, and pressed a hand to the stone for balance. The touch grounded her, cool and unyielding, a reminder that the world bent to no one's will, not even a king's. A low growl shattered the silence, freezing her mid-breath. Shadows shifted in the gloom ahead, not wind-stirred snow, but forms slinking low, eyes gleaming amber under the moon's fractured light. Rivals. 3 of them, hulking betas from the Ironclaw clan, their pelts ragged from border skirmishes, scents thick with aggression and the sour reek of old blood. They had scented her trail, an easy prey exiled and alone, their muzzles curling in predatory grins. "Lost lamb from Stoneborn's fold," the lead one snarled, his voice gravel rough, claws scraping stone as he circled. "The peaks claim strays like you, we'll make it quick or not." Ilvara's heart thundered, fear coiling tight in her gut, but beneath it surged the fire's echo, a defiant spark she could not name. She backed against the ravine wall, whispering the ancient syllables under her breath, not as command, but as plea. Elindra, Vethar. The air shimmered faintly, a heat mirage in the cold, but it was not enough. The first beta lunged, jaws snapping, his weight slamming her to the snow. Pain bloomed in her shoulder as teeth grazed flesh, drawing blood that steamed on the frost. Hot, vital, a scarlet bloom against the white. Then, chaos erupted from the tree line. A massive form barreled into the fray, silver fur flashing under moonlight, a roar that shook the ravine like thunder's prelude. Halvik. He struck the attacker off her with brutal precision, his armored bulk a whirlwind of claws and fangs, the silver foxcloak discarded in the shift. Blood sprayed, dark arcs painting the snow. As he tore into the second rival, his movements fueled by a ferocity born of guilt and unspoken vow. Why was he here? The question flickered in Ilvara's mind, even as she scrambled back, the third beta turning on her with renewed fury. She rolled aside, the beast's paw raking air where her throat had been, and in desperation, her hand found a loose stone. But before she could swing, Halvik was there, human again in a blur, his dagger plunging deep into the rival's flank. The creature howled, collapsing in a heap, the metallic tang of blood mingling with the pine-sharp scent of his exertion. Panting, Halvik whirled to her, eyes wild with the battle's afterglow, a gash across his forearm weeping red. "On your feet," he growled, not command but urgency, extending a hand slick with gore. Ilvara hesitated, the instinctive bond flaring anew, fear yielding to a wary curiosity, her omega senses drawn to his alpha strength, the melancholy beneath his resolve. She took his hand, the contact electric, warmth seeping through the pain, and together they fled deeper into the ravine, the rivals' dying snarls fading behind. They did not stop until they reached a shallow cave mouth, its entrance veiled by icicles like frozen teeth. Inside, the air hung still, heavy with the mineral breath of earth, a fragile refuge from the storm that now lashed the peaks. Halvik slumped against the wall, binding his wound with strips torn from his tunic, his breaths ragged. Up close in the dimness, the lines of his face deepened, the guilt in his eyes a shadowed pool. He had followed her trail at dusk, driven by the horror of his decree, the realization that exiling her left her vulnerable to the very threats his throne failed to stem. Rivals probed the borders, traitors whispered of ancient powers that could tip the wars, and in her he saw not just a key, but a mirror to his failures. "I could not let them take you," he admitted, voice low, threaded with the weight of duty's chains. "Not after what I saw in the flames." Ilvara sank to the cave floor, her shoulder throbbing, blood staining her shift in a deepening crimson. Empathy stirred unbidden, softening the edges of her denial, the way his presence shielded her, not as king to subject, but as one broken soul to another. She tore a strip from her own hem, pressing it to his arm without thinking, the gesture intimate in the flickering torchlight he kindled from flint and tinder. The small flame danced between them, casting golden flickers on his scarred skin, echoing the pyre's impossible mercy. "You condemned me," she whispered, curiosity overriding fear, her touch lingering as the bond wove tighter, instinctive threads pulling them closer. "Yet here you are, bleeding for a heretic." His gaze met hers, storm-gray depths holding a quiet unraveling, the ethical king marked by loss, finding in her defiance a compassion he had long denied himself. "Perhaps we are both heretics," he murmured, the words a bridge over the chasm of their worlds. Outside, the wind howled, weavos joining in a chorus of pursuit. But within the cave, empathy bloomed fragile as the fire's glow, turning isolation to shared vigil. What was redemption, if not this choice, to protect what one had nearly destroyed? The moon filtered through cracks above, silvering their forms as the night pressed in, demanding they confront the peril that bound them. The cave's dim hollow cradled them like a forgotten prayer, its walls veined with quartz that caught the torch's hesitant flame, scattering flecks of light like stars fallen into stone. Ilvara sat cross-legged on the uneven floor, the metallic tang of blood still thick in the air, mingling with the damp earthiness that seeped from every crevice. Her shoulder ached, a dull throb where the rival's teeth had grazed, but it was the proximity of the king that unsettled her most, the way his presence filled the space, not oppressively, but as a counterweight to her solitude, drawing her instincts into a quiet rebellion. She had bound his wound with trembling fingers, the fabric now stiffening with his drying blood, and in that act, something shifted. Fear receding like tide, leaving curiosity in its wake, a tentative bridge over the chasm of their stations. Halvik leaned back against the rock, his broad chest rising and falling in measured breaths, the gash on his arm a stark red line against the pale scar tissue of older battles. At 50, his body bore the map of a reign forged in frost and fury, muscles corded from endless patrols, eyes shadowed by the ghosts of decisions that haunted his sleep. Guilt coiled in him like a serpent, not just for the exile he had imposed, but for the deeper fracture. The ancient tongue she wielded, a power his forebears had sealed to preserve the pack's fragile harmony. He had followed her into the peaks not from royal whim, but from the dread that her survival, or death, might tip the scales of a destiny he could no longer ignore. The rivals' ambush had been no coincidence. Whispers from Thorn's spies spoke of Ironclaw's hunger for the old magics, and Ilvara, unwittingly, was the flame they sought to claim. Outside, the storm raged fiercer, wind shrieking through the icicles like the wail of damned souls, snow piling against the entrance in drifts that muffled the world. Ilvara shivered, pulling her knees close, the thin shift offering scant barrier to the cold that clawed inward. The torch sputtered, its light wavering as if sensing the tension between them. She glanced at him, the instinctive pull tightening in her chest, a warmth that defied the chill, rationalized as mere gratitude for his intervention, yet it stirred deeper, whispering of bonds woven by the Deusa herself. "Why risk the borders for me?" she asked, her voice soft as the cave's echo, laced with the residue of ancient cadence. A king's life is not forfeit for an Omega's folly. He met her gaze, storm-gray eyes reflecting the flame's dance, and for a moment, the melancholy in him cracked open, revealing the ethical core that had sustained him through loss. Folly? No. What I saw in the pyre, it was no accident of the elements. His words hung heavy, philosophy threading through the admission like roots through soil. The throne I hold was built on bindings, oaths in that very tongue, sworn to keep powers dormant, lest they summon war anew. My mate died in the last uprising, torn by claws, fueled by such unrest. I swore to end it, to choose duty over chaos. But your voice calls to what I buried. Ilvara's breath caught, the weight of his confession settling like fresh snow on her shoulders. She had always felt the words as inheritance, fragments from her grandmother's dying lips, passed down through Omega lines, dismissed as mere lore. Grief had summoned them in the temple, a balm for the mate she had lost to fever and skirmish scars, but now they pulsed within her, insistent, as if awakening to his nearness. The air in the cave thickened, charged with an unseen current, the torch flaring brighter without fuel. Her skin prickled, not from cold, but from a rising heat that bloomed in her core, spreading like liquid fire through her veins. It began as a whisper, a syllable escaping her lips unbidden. Solkari Nun, soft and involuntary, born of the empathy forging between them. The flame leaped, surging from the torch to coil in the air, a serpent of gold and crimson that hovered between their faces. Ilvara froze, eyes widening as the fire responded, not raging, but shaping itself. Tendrils weaving into runes that glowed against the cave walls, ancient symbols mirroring those on Eldfrost's flagstones. They pulsed with her heartbeat, illuminating hidden veins in the quartz, lines of power long dormant, now stirring like veins of molten earth. The heat enveloped her, caressing without burn, and in its glow, visions flickered at the edge of her mind, glimpses of thrones crumbling, packs united under a lunar banner, wars quelled not by blade, but by words that bound without chains. Halvik recoiled slightly, then leaned forward, transfixed, the horror of realization dawning in his features. This was no mere gift. It was the Pathfinder's mark. The hidden Omega seer from prophecies etched in the Deusa's temples, the one who could unravel the gods' bindings, revealing destinies woven in flame and tongue. His blood ran cold, then hot, as the runes reflected in his eyes, echoing the guilt he carried. He had condemned the very key to his realm's salvation, the power to redeem the borders from endless betrayal. Deusa's mercy, he murmured, voice rough with awe and dread. You are the vessel. The tongue doesn't just speak, it reveals. The rivals seek it to shatter our pacts, to claim the old dominions, and I, I nearly let the fire take you." The manifestation faded as suddenly as it had risen, the flame settling back to the torch, leaving the cave warmer, the air humming with residual energy. Ilvara's hands trembled in her lap, the weight of it crashing over her, rejection transformed into revelation, her exile no longer isolation, but the prelude to a greater unraveling. Fear warred with a burgeoning acceptance, the bond with him deepening into something spiritual, a shared destiny that terrified her. What was strength, if not embracing a power that could forge peace or invite apocalypse? She reached out, her fingers brushing his, the contact sealing the moment like wax on a decree, instinctive, resisted no longer, but accepted in the quiet philosophy of their shared gaze. Yet outside, the storm's fury masked approaching shadows, weavos rising in the distance, not wild, but orchestrated, the Ironclaw vanguard closing in on the cave's fragile sanctuary. Halvik's jaw set, the king's resolve hardening over the revelation's fragility. The night deepened, the moon's light fracturing through the ice, casting their forms in silver and doubt, as the threads of fate pulled taut, demanding a choice between concealment and confrontation. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The cave's fragile peace shattered like thin ice under a heavy tread, the storm's howl yielding to the guttural snarls that echoed from the ravine below. Ilvara tensed, her hand still lingering on Halvik's, the warmth of their connection a fleeting anchor against the encroaching dread. The quartz veins in the walls pulsed faintly, as if the earth's own heart quickened in warning, their silver glow dimming under the weight of approaching shadows. Outside, the wind carried the scent of iron and fury, rival pelts matted with fresh snow, breaths ragged from the ascent, a vanguard of Ironclaw shifters driven by whispers of the ancient power they craved to wield. Halvik rose in a fluid motion, his form silhouetted against the torch's dying flicker, the gash on his arm forgotten in the surge of protective instinct. His storm-gray eyes hardened, scanning the icicle-veiled entrance, where moonlight fractured into shards that danced across the blood-stained floor. At 50, he had faced betrayals before, the fever that stole his mate, the border packs fractured by ambitious alphas. But this felt like reckoning, the past clawing back to claim what his guilt had nearly surrendered. "Stay behind me," he murmured to Ilvara, his voice a low rumble, laced with the melancholy resolve that had defined his reign. He drew his dagger anew, its blade catching the moon's pale edge, a silver promise amid the encroaching dark. She nodded, though fear coiled tight in her chest, not just for the peril, but for the unraveling bond that pulled her toward him. Instinctive, resisted in the rational corners of her mind, yet blooming like fire in frost. The ancient tongue stirred on her lips, unbidden, a vibration that hummed through her blood, urging revelation even as survival demanded silence. What was this power if it invited war rather than peace? Her shoulder throbbed, a reminder of the grays that had drawn her crimson into the snow, and now that same blood seemed to call to the night, a scarlet thread weaving her into the deuce's intricate web. The first rival breached the entrance, a hulking alpha named Garrick, his furred form shifting to man as he ducked the icicles, eyes burning amber with predatory zeal. Flanked by 4 betas, their claws scraped stone, breaths fogging the air like curses. Garrick's lips curled, revealing fangs stained from past kills, his voice gravel-thick with triumph. Stone-born, hiding in holes like a cornered fox. And the witch Omega, the tongue we seek. Ironclaw will unbind what your bloodline chained. Hand her over, or we'll carve the key from your bones. Halvik stepped forward, his stance unyielding. The cave's confines amplifying the clash of auras, alpha against alpha, a storm of dominance that made the air hum. Ilvara's heart pounded, empathy warring with the urge to flee. She saw the guilt flicker in his profile, the ethical king torn between duty to his pack and the fragile redemption offered in her presence. The rivals advanced, their movements coordinated, shadows of Thorn's treachery. The High Elder's spies had surely fed them the trail, a betrayal born of fear that the ancient words might eclipse his influence. Garrick lunged, claws extended, but Halvik met him mid-stride, dagger clashing against extended talons in a spray of sparks. The cave erupted into visceral chaos, the torch extinguishing in the fray, leaving only moonlight to silver the violence. Blood slicked the stone as Halvik parried a beta's strike, his boot slamming into another's chest with bone-cracking force. Ilvara pressed against the wall, the cold seeping into her back, but the fire within her stirred, a defiant heat that bloomed unbidden. "Ilindra Vither," she whispered, the syllables escaping like breath on frost, and the air shimmered. A coil of flame ignited from the embers, not consuming, but illuminating, casting the combatants in crimson hues that revealed hidden weaknesses. A rival's limp from old wounds, Garrick's flank scarred by forgotten oaths. Garrick roared, turning on her with feral intent, but Halvik intercepted, driving his dagger into the alpha's shoulder. Blood welled hot and deep, the metallic scent flooding the space, mingling with the ozone tang of her manifesting gift. The king staggered under a counterblow, a claw raking his side, tearing fabric and flesh in a fresh line of red. Ilvara cried out, the sound raw, pulling her forward despite the terror. She could not stand idle. The bond demanded action, empathy transforming to fierce choice. Her hand outstretched, the ancient tongue flowing steadier now. "Solkarinun, Bindar eth," and flames erupted in controlled bursts, singeing pelts without mercy, forcing two betas to yelp and retreat into the storm. Yet Garrick pressed on, his eyes locking on Ilvara with a hunger that chilled deeper than the wind. "The Pathfinder!" he snarled, recognizing the runes that briefly etched the air. Symbols of the Deuce's seer who could reveal destinies or shatter them. Thorn promised the tongue's vessel would break Stoneborn's throne. "Join us, Omega, or burn with him." The words struck like betrayal's blade. Thorn, the grizzled elder who had condemned her, now allying with rivals to seize the power for his own ascent. The pack's past flooded Ilvara's mind. The temple's quiet vigils shattered by politics. Her mate's death not just skirmish, but pawn in games of ambition. Halvik felled another beta with a savage twist, his breaths labored, blood dripping from his wounds to pool at his feet. He turned to her, eyes meeting in the fray's brief lull, a silent question hanging between them. Fight for the pack that rejected her, or flee to freedom's uncertain wilds? The instinctive pull tightened, no longer denied. Love as redemption's proof, not easy reward, demanding she choose compassion over the war that scarred them both. "Ilvara," he rasped, voice threaded with guilt's raw edge. "The tongue. It could end this. Bind them, or we run. But the pack, my pack, waits beyond, poisoned by lies." Tears stung her eyes. The winds howl outside, mocking her dilemma. Forgiveness for the betrayal that exiled her, or liberty in the peak's embrace, leaving Halvik to his throne's crumbling weight. The flames danced at her fingertips, responsive, waiting for her will, the fire that spared her now a symbol of choice, its warmth a philosophical whisper. What was true power, if not mercy's blade over vengeance? Garrick charged again, the remaining betas closing in, their weavos summoning more from the storm-swept slopes. Ilvara stepped forward, the cave's quartz igniting in sympathy, bathing the confrontation in ethereal light. Her voice rose, steady amid the chaos, the ancient words weaving not destruction, but revelation, a binding that exposed Thorn's treachery in glowing runes on the walls. Truths the Deusa demanded unveiled. Garrick faltered, the vision of his own downfall flickering in the flames, but the choice hung unresolved, the night pressing in with the weight of moral fracture. Blood and fire mingled on the stone, the moon witnessing as Ilvara's heart tore between the king's haunted gaze and the wild call of unclaimed destiny, the first cracks of Renacimento echoing in the silence between strikes. The cave's quartz veins throbbed like exposed arteries, their silver light fracturing into prisms that painted the blood-slicked stone in ethereal hues, as Ilvara's words hung in the air, ancient bindings uncoiling not to destroy, but to illuminate the rot festering within the pack's heart. Garrick staggered, his amber eyes widening at the rune's merciless revelation. Visions of thorns shadowed pacts with Ironclaw, the elder's claws dipped in the blood of border dead, all to seize the tongue's power and topple Stoneborn's line. The rival Alpha's snarl twisted into a grimace of doubt, his form faltering as the flames whispered truths he could no longer deny. Ambition's hollow throne, crumbling under the Deuce's unblinking gaze. Ilvara stood transfixed, her outstretched hand trembling, the fire's warmth a living current surging through her veins, chasing the chill of betrayal's sting. The ancient tongue had not just exposed the traitor. It had peeled back her own scars, laying bare the grief that birthed her exile, the mate's fevered breaths echoing in temple shadows, the pack's averted eyes when she whispered solace in forbidden syllables. Fear clawed at her edges, the instinctive bond with Halvik a tether pulling her from the abyss, yet it demanded everything. To forgive the world that condemned her, or sever the threads and claim the wild peaks as her unchained domain. Her blood, mingling with his on the floor, steamed faintly, a scarlet sigil binding their fates, its heat a philosophical murmur. What was rebirth, if not rising from the ashes of one's own pyre? Halvik pressed the advantage, his dagger a blur of silver arc, plunging into Garrick's exposed flank where the runes had marked vulnerability. The rival howled, a guttural cry swallowed by the storm's roar outside, collapsing in a heap of fur and fury. His betas scattering into the night like shadows fleeing dawn. Blood pooled around the fallen, its deep crimson seeping into cracks, feeding the quartz's glow until the cave pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. Halvik whirled to Ilvara, his chest heaving, wounds weeping fresh red down his side, the melancholy in his storm-gray eyes softened by a fierce gratitude. At 50, he had spilled blood for duty's sake countless times, but this, defending the Omega he had nearly slain, tasted of redemption's bitter edge, a cure for the guilt that had hollowed him since his mate's pyre. She lowered her hand, the flames receding to embers that flickered at her feet, their warmth lingering like a lover's breath on her skin. The air hummed with residual power, ozone and pine mingling with the metallic tang of victory, but triumph felt fragile, laced with the moral fracture of what came next. "Thorn," she whispered, the name a wound reopened, her voice carrying the tongue's subtle cadence. Empathy warred within her for the king before her, the ethical ruler marked by loss, his presence a shield that stirred her Omega core to something deeper, a union resisted yet inevitable. Freedom beckoned from the peak's silent call, a liberty untainted by pack politics, but in his haunted gaze she glimpsed the cost. A throne teetering on betrayal, borders bleeding under rival claws, and a destiny that intertwined their souls like roots in frozen earth. Halvik sheathed his blade, stepping close enough that his heat cut through the cave's damp chill, his gloved hand brushing her arm, a touch electric, sealing the bond's quiet acceptance. "The pack is poisoned," he admitted, voice rough with the weight of confession, silver threading his beard, catching the quartz light like frost on steel. "Thorn's treachery explains the incursions, the whispers that drove me to condemn you, but your gift could heal it, bind the fractures without chains, or we flee, leave Eldfrost to its wars." His words hung between them, philosophy etched in the lines of his face, power versus compassion, the king's duty clashing with the pull toward her, love as proof forged in sacrifice, not idle reward. Outside, the storm abated to a mournful wind, huivos fading into distant echoes. But the night pressed in with spiritual urgency, the moon's sickle slicing through clouds, silvering the icicles like tears frozen mid-fall. Ilvara's heart ached, the fire's residue blooming in her chest, a heat that demanded choice. She thought of the temple's hearths, cold now under Thorn's shadow, the Omegas who had shunned her grief, and the Deusa's symbols carved in stone, crescents of rebirth, flames that purified without consuming. Rejection had been her cradle, but Renacimento called louder, whispering of faith over despair, destiny embraced as freedom's true form. With a steadying breath, she met his eyes, the ancient tongue rising not in command, but in quiet invocation. Vethar Solkari, Undara Eth. The syllables wove through the cave, stirring the quartz to life once more, veins igniting in a cascade of light that spilled outward, piercing the entrance like lunar beams. Visions unfurled in the air between them. The pack gathered under Eldfrost's spires, Thorn's form revealed in glowing betrayal, borders sealed not by blood, but by words that mended oaths. Halvik's breath hitched, the cure manifesting, a spiritual balm easing the guilt's vice on his soul, his wounds knitting faintly under the light's touch, scars fading to whispers. Yet the power exacted its toll. Ilvara gasped, knees buckling as the energy drained her, fire coiling inward to cauterize her own grazes, leaving her skin unmarked, but her spirit raw. Sacrifice bloomed in the act, the Omega yielding her isolation for the pack's fractured whole, choosing union with the king not as submission, but as equal forge. Halvik caught her, his arms a steady anchor, the bond solidifying in that embrace. Alpha and Omega, guilt and gift entwined, their heartbeats sinking like thunder and rain. "We return," she murmured against his chest, the words a vow, compassion's blade cutting through vengeance's veil. Not for the throne, but for what it could be, redeemed. The cave brightened, the quartz's glow cresting like a false dawn, illuminating their forms in gold and silver, blood and fire merging into a symbol of rebirth. Outside, the peaks stood sentinel, snow drifting soft now, as if the Deusa herself exhaled forgiveness. But in the distance, more huivos rose, Thorn's forces converging, the final confrontation looming like fate's unyielding hand. Ilvara's choice hung in the balance, a dilemma spiritual etched in her veins. Had she bound their destinies to peace, or merely invited the war's true heart? The moon watched, silent witness, as they stepped into the night, the flame of redemption flickering alive between them, demanding one last proof. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. The moon hung low over the whispering peaks, its sickle blade slicing through the thinning clouds, casting the snow in strokes of silver and shadow as Ilvara and Halvik emerged from the cave's luminous embrace. The quartz's glow lingered on their skin like a benediction, faint runes etched in the air behind them, fading into the wind's mournful sigh. Ilvara's bare feet sank into the fresh drifts, the cold a sharp counterpoint to the fire still humming in her blood. A warmth born of sacrifice, sealing her choice with the weight of inevitability. She had invoked the tongue not for vengeance, but for mending, visions of a redeemed pack flickering in her mind's eye like embers refusing the dark. Yet doubt gnawed at the edges. Was this union her rebirth, or merely a deeper binding, chaining her gift to a throne stained by betrayal? Halvik walked beside her, his arm brushing hers in silent solidarity, the gash on his side staunched by the ancient light, but leaving a crimson stain that bloomed across his tunic like a rose in frost. At 50, his steps carried the gravity of a king unmoored, the melancholy in his storm-gray eyes tempered by a quiet awe, the ethical core that had driven him to exile now yielding to compassion's pull. The bond between them thrummed, no longer resisted. It was acceptance forged in the cave's crucible, love as proof of their shared fractures, a redemption that demanded they face the night together. His gloved hand found hers, fingers intertwining with a gentleness that belied his warrior's scars, the contact electric, grounding her against the rising uivos that echoed from the slopes below. Thorn's forces, converging like wolves scenting weakness. The wind whipped snow into veils that stung their faces, carrying the distant clamor of paws on stone and the low growl of orchestrated fury. Ilvara's heart quickened, the ancient syllables stirring unbidden on her tongue, a vibration that synced with the moon's pale pulse overhead. She felt the peak's spiritual weight pressing down, the jagged spires as witnesses to her renascimento, their ice-veined faces reflecting the Deuce's indifferent mercy. Blood from her earlier wound had crusted on her shift, a deep red sigil mingling with Halvik's, their essences woven in the snow's unyielding white. What was destiny, if not this fragile freedom, to heal the pack that rejected her, or shatter the oaths and vanish into the wild's embrace? The philosophy settled in her chest like embers, warm yet searing. Strength lay not in power's grasp, but in releasing it for another's light. They crested a ridge, the landscape unfolding in cinematic sweep. The ravine below a cauldron of shadows, where 24 ironclaw shifters mingled with Thorn's traders, their forms shifting under moonlight, pelts rippling like liquid night. Torches sputtered in the fray, casting erratic flares that illuminated Thorn at the center. His grizzled frame hunched in armored furs, eyes burning with the zeal of a usurper. He had bartered the pack's soul for this moment, feeding rivals the whispers of Ilvara's gift to fracture Eldfrost from within. His ambition a poison rooted in fear of the old magics eclipsing his sway. Stoneborn, he bellowed, voice cracking like ice under strain, as the horde advanced up the slope, claws scraping earth, breaths fogging in predatory clouds. You've brought the key to your own unmaking. The tongue will bind your throne to dust. Halvik halted, drawing his dagger with a metallic whisper, his body tensing into the king's unyielding line. The guilt that had hollowed him flared anew, not for the wars he had waged, but for the blindness that let treachery fester under his rule. Ilvara's hand tightened in his, the instinctive bond a lifeline amid the encroaching storm, her Omega grace steadying his alpha resolve. She stepped forward, the wind tugging at her dark hair, framing her face in wild defiance. The fire's residue coiling faintly around her form like a shroud of living light. Fear coiled in her gut, raw and visceral, the scent of pine and blood thick on the breeze, but beneath it bloomed empathy. For the pack's fractured souls, for the king who had glimpsed her worth in flames, for the Deuce's weave demanding sacrifice over slaughter. The vanguard crested the ridge first, a wave of snarls and lunging forms, but Ilvara raised her voice before steel met flesh. Elindra Vethar, Solkari Undara. The ancient tongue poured forth, not as weapon, but as revelation, a cascade of syllables that hummed through the night, stirring the snow into swirling eddies that carried her words like spirits unbound. Flames ignited along the ground, not consuming but encircling the traitors in coils of gold and crimson, their heat a caress that peeled back illusions. Runes bloomed in the air, vast and luminous, projecting visions across the peaks. Thorn's clandestine oaths etched in blood, the elder's claws in her mate's fevered end, the border's incursions fueled by his greed. The horde faltered, gasps rippling through their ranks as truths unveiled, rival alphas turning on Thorn with betrayed fury, his form shrinking under the moon's accusing glare. Thorn lunged through the flames, dagger raised, his face a mask of desperate rage, but Halvik intercepted, their clash a blur of armored fury. Blood sprayed, hot arcs painting the snow as the king drove his blade home. Thorn collapsing with a gurgle that echoed into silence. The flames surged higher, responding to Ilvara's will, binding the remaining traitors not in chains, but in oaths renewed, compulsion yielding to choice, their wills bending toward the deuce's light. Pain lanced through her then, the power's toll of visceral fire in her veins, knees buckling as visions crested. The pack whole under Eldfrost's spires, borders sealed in lunar peace, her gift the bridge from rejection to rebirth. Halvik caught her as she fell, his arms a fortress of warmth, the bond sealing in that moment. Union not as reward, but as cure, their heartbeats entwining like roots breaking stone. The flames died to embers, the snow settling soft around them, the weavos fading into harmonious howls from the keep's distant halls, drawn by the night's spiritual clarion. Ilvara's eyes met his, storm sea depths reflecting the silver moon, acceptance washing over her like dawn's first thaw. She had chosen not freedom's solitary wilds, but compassion's forge, sacrificing isolation for the pack's mending, her ancient tongue the key to their shared redemption. The peaks stood silent, the wind a gentle exhalation now, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. In the quiet aftermath, as the reformed shifters knelt in the snow, Halvik pressed his forehead to hers, the melancholy lifting like mist under sun. "You have unbound us all," he whispered, voice threaded with wonder, the ethical king reborn in her light. Ilvara smiled faintly, the fire's warmth eternal in her core, a symbol of mercy's triumph over despair. The moon watched, its light a benediction, as Renascimento bloomed across the frozen world, love's proof etched in blood and flame, destiny claimed as their own. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.